It's so important to consider the audience when you're choreographing. Choreographing? Hello there and welcome to another Masterclass Monday. So today's topic is looking at choreography. So this week I'm going to talk about my experience of choreography and some of the lessons that I've learned. So a little bit about my experience with choreography. My experience has been primarily based in contemporary dance and movement, but has also included sort of some show dance, so as per se, and sort of comedy style movement. So I don't really have any basis of formal education in dance, however, and I would very strongly hesitate to call myself a dancer. But I'm also writer, co-choreographer and performer in a dance performance called Do As I Say, Not As I Do by the accessible dance company Scuff Shoes Theatre. So based on this experience, let's roll through some key lessons I've learned, some tips and tricks that may be useful to you. So even when making a dance piece or a performance that does not necessarily have a sort of plot per se or lines, you still need to have a solid idea of characters. You know, how do you move? What kind of character are you portraying and why? You know, are you keeping grounded and heavy, or maybe you're feeling sort of springy and light? Are your moves slow and considered or fast and deliberate? All of these ways of moving convey very different characters and characteristics for interpretation for your audience, and knowing the kind of characters you're wanting to present on stage, either in academic exploration or storytelling, will help you both in the creation of your overarching structure and your move by move making. I suppose a top level example of this is if you're creating a world which is violent, you know, sharp explosive moves directed towards each other may help with this, or a world obsessed with ritual and tradition, you know, slow movements with incredible deliberation will help convey the idea of movements and roles cultivated over many years. Character is key to clarity, I suppose, in dance, and it's important that you keep it in mind from the very beginning. When getting started, it can be very easy to get caught up, especially if you're not the most confident or experienced choreographer, on what the movements should be. I would recommend for contemporary dance certainly to instead shift that focus a little bit onto what the movement's achieving, or you know, how you're doing it. I suppose two examples from the show I co-choreographed with the excellent dancer and choreographer Fern Reed, with the opening movement sequence, which was a great deal of contemporary movement, but the focus of the movement was a conversation. Fern and I had agreed that we wanted to have a conversation where we replaced the words with movement, as if we had a secret language that the audience didn't know. And so with that, we then decided what the conversation would be, and then took those sentences and replies and made it movement. And this was massively helpful for sort of choreographing that first sequence. And as the movements themselves were not important, the proximity of ourselves to each other instead was. So for example, close is a whisper, and the back and forth of the movements between us were the important factor. So don't worry about getting hung up on what the movement itself is so much as the intentions and why or how you're doing that movement. It is imperative that you bring in an outside eye on your work. Movement is complex and so very, very open to interpretation, which is to say that until a group of people watch your work, you can only know the intention, not the effect. So make sure that you are bringing people in to watch your work and then asking them about what they've watched. A key thing to do when asking for that kind of feedback is ask open questions. You know, avoid leading your outside eyes in their feedback. So a question of what did you think was happening is a much better question than did it look like the couple was breaking up. You know, asking closed questions immediately places a frame of reference upon what the person just watched, and you've given them a context that your average audience member isn't going to have. It is so important to make sure you're considering your audience when you're choreographing a piece of movement. So firstly, if you know the space you're going to work in, you know, ask a friend to watch your sequences from all over the space and see if they're able to see what you're doing still. And a big one for this is any floor work. I know I certainly have made the mistake before of putting in floor work, which was really well made, but due to the flat nature of the space, only the audience in the first 2 rows were ever actually able to see it, which doesn't really make for a particularly effective movement sequence. Secondly, when bringing people in to see your work or be an outside eye, bring in people who are indicative of your audience. You know, if you're trying to make a dance performance with mass appeal, bringing in a ballet professional who's trained for years and is working still, you know, it's helpful in some ways, but it's far less effective almost than someone who knows nothing about dance more than a passing interest. And this can be difficult to act on, as usually the people that we can easily call on to view our work are other students or professionals. But there's a whole framework of professional and learning experience that your peers have with which to view your work. I mean, as well as the keen interest of someone who is passionate enough about dance or your topic to turn it into their career to begin with. So when we were making Do As I Say, Not As I Do, I described it regularly that I wanted to make a performance that my dad would enjoy. That is not to say my dad doesn't enjoy theatre or is against it anyway. He's a very, very creative man, but also approaches things in theatre quite literally. So with this in mind, I made sure that before it went out on tour, that he'd seen the show. And I think its first tour day, he came to see the performance, and I asked him if he enjoyed it, and thank goodness he did, because had he not done so, I would have been ready to go back and re-examine what wasn't working or where he'd felt confused or sort of lost emotionally in it. As with all creative endeavours, especially devising based ones, it can feel really paralysing at the start of a process, and it can feel almost impossible to know where to begin. And suddenly, your very first decision, you know, that first few moves, start carrying this impossible weight of expectation and the need to fulfil a huge list of requirements. And this just isn't conducive to making movement or theatre at all. So just stop. Take it a step at a time. You know, a fantastic way of choreographing that I learned from Fern was just to do it 5 moves at a time. All you need to do first is use 3 minutes, make a sequence of 5 movements. You know, you might move an arm, take a step forward, bend at the waist, run your hand along the ground, tap your head 3 times and jump in the air. Brilliant, that's 5 moves. You've started. You know, now put them together, see what comes of it. Excellent, now do another 5. Add it onto the ones before. And as you go, you'll start to find what feels right and logical to sequence, what moves come after others. And then you can go back and tweak or change things you don't like or that don't work. I mean, keep doing this for even half an hour, 40 minutes, and you can end up with nearly a 50-move sequence choreographed. You know, not necessarily ready for an audience, but you've got that material there now to play with. So just start small and keep adding. You know your own strengths and limitations really well. You know, sometimes too well, and we do need to persuade ourselves to push our boundaries a little more at times. But it's really useful when you're choreographing a performance for yourself to know what you're capable of. But as a choreographer, that's not always the case. Sometimes you're working with other people, and I think it's really integral to talk to your performers. Take time to play in regards to movement and get a feel of what each of the performers are strong at doing and what they might be a little bit weaker at doing or what their limitations are. You know, in what areas are they confident? And once you feel that you've got a grip on this, then you can start to choreograph. You know, you're going to work very differently with a confident dance performer who's very acrobatic than with someone who's never danced in front of people before and isn't a confident mover, both, you know, in the movements you're choosing and how you're teaching it. So as a strong example would be when I brought in a new performer to replace me in Do As I Say, Not As I Do, Fern and I made sure that they knew they had free rein to adjust and change choreography to better suit their strengths. You know, they were a much more technical dancer than I was, in many ways a much better dancer than I was, and so we wanted them to have the space to bring that to the forefront. You know, do things that only they could do, and the piece felt much better and much more natural once they'd found their own language and movement within the show. Now, we were able to do that as they were a supremely confident dancer and mover with choreography experience of their own. And I suppose an example of working with the strengths of very nervous performers with very little dance experience was, you know, teach the dance, move by move, present a logical thought pattern through the piece to aid with memory, and then identifying that whilst not confident dancers, you know, your performers might have talents in acting, so they might be incredibly charming or something like this. So I made sure to just sort of give a brief amount of space where they can improvise with their characters, play off each other, you know, steal the hearts of the audience, which they did incredibly well. You know, find the strengths and limitations of your performers and use them to your advantage. So those have been all the tips and tricks on choreography this week. Thank you very, very much for listening. If you have any suggestions about what we could talk about in a coming week, or anything that you particularly want to learn about, or if you have any further questions about this week's topic, please do just get in touch with us in the comments below and we'll do our best to reply or take it on board. Thank you for watching, have a great week, and as always, stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you soon.